Technology has proven that the ancient map is a fake. But a 69-year-old black archive cleaner glances at it and whispers, "It's not a fake. It's a confession." She has learned the secret language of the spy she hunted 40 years ago. Now, to uncover the conspiracy, the Invisible Woman will have to trick the world into believing that its most famous historian has made a terrible mistake. To the esteemed academics and ambitious researchers of the National Archives, she was a fixture of the quiet, temperature-controlled basement. Clara May Thompson, at 69, was the senior archival assistant, a title that sounded more important than her actual duties of painstakingly cleaning, restoring, and cataloging ancient maps. A quiet, dignified black woman with shocks of silver hair tied in a simple bun. Her hands were stained with the faint, inky ghosts of centuries-old documents. She moved through her subterranean world with a patient, monastic calm, a woman who preferred the company of faded parchment to people. They saw a harmless, slightly eccentric old woman, a living relic who was more comfortable with the past than the present. They never suspected they were looking at the woman once known in the whisper networks of Cold War intelligence as the Weaver, a legendary cartographic analyst for the CIA. A woman who could read a map not for where it led, but for the secrets it concealed in its ink, its paper, its very creation. A woman who had been forced into a quiet retirement after a mission was compromised, taking the blame to protect her team and disappearing into the one place she knew no one would ever think to look for a spy, a library. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning with the arrival of the Donovan Atlas, a collection of supposedly 17th-century maps of the New World, donated to the archives by a wealthy and very public benefactor. The centerpiece was a map of the Carolina coast, rumored to show the location of a long-lost colonial settlement. It was a discovery that would make headlines and secure the reputation of the archive's ambitious new director, Dr. Alastair Finch. Dr. Finch was a man whose crisp white shirt and severe features seemed as pale and unyielding as the marble floors of his institution. He had built his career on the ruthless application of technology to history, believing in data, not dust. To him, an artifact was only as real as its spectrographic analysis. And the analysis of the Donovan map was a disaster. "It's a forgery," Finch announced, his voice tight with fury as he stood before his team of young, white, tech-savvy historians. He jabbed a finger at a complex graph on a large monitor. "The ink composition is a mess. We're seeing traces of titanium dioxide, which wasn't used until the early 20th century. The paper shows cellulose structures consistent with 19th century processing. It's a clever fake, but a fake nonetheless. We are the laughingstock of the historical community." The team was devastated. The planned press conference to announce the magnificent discovery would have to be changed to a humiliating admission of being duped. The benefactor would be furious, the archive's reputation in tatters. Down in the restoration room, Clara received the map. Her task was simple: to perform a surface-level cleaning and prepare the forgery for storage in the vault of fakes. The historians upstairs had already passed their digital sentence. She was just the janitor for their discarded theories. She laid the map out on her large oak table, the soft light from her lamp illuminating the delicate, hand-drawn coastlines. The historians had seen the data. Clara was seeing the story. Her trained eye immediately saw what the spectrographs had told Finch. The inconsistencies were obvious. But to her, they weren't mistakes. They were signatures. The faint trace of titanium dioxide wasn't an error. It was a specific type of nearly invisible ink base she hadn't seen in 40 years. The mix of paper pulp wasn't a sign of a 19th century forgery. It was the trademark of a specific Cold War-era spy she had once hunted, a man known only as the Ghost, who created his documents to be read on 2 different levels. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked closer, her fingers gently tracing a river inlet on the map. It was drawn with a slight, almost imperceptible tremor, a deliberate flaw that was, in fact, a coded symbol. This wasn't a map of a lost colony. It was a message. She knew, with a certainty that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up, that the top map was a deliberate, modern fake, designed to be detected. It was a shell, a container. And hidden underneath, using a complex layering technique only a handful of people in the world had ever known, was a second, authentic map. A confession, left by a spy she had believed to be long dead. She had to warn Finch. She knew the dismissal she would face, but the stakes were too high. She found him in his pristine, glass-walled office, preparing his speech for the press conference. "Dr. Finch," she began, her voice quiet. "I believe you are mistaken about the Donovan map." Finch looked up from his notes, his expression a mixture of annoyance and pity. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his tone the one a parent uses with a confused child. "The spectrographic analysis is conclusive. It is a fake. I appreciate your dedication, but this is a matter for scientists, not assistants. Please, return to the basement." Clara stood her ground. "With respect, sir, your machines are only looking for one map. You need to look for the second one." Finch stared at her, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A second map? Mrs. Thompson, please. Don't waste my time with conspiracy theories. The matter is closed." The dismissal was absolute. Clara nodded slowly and retreated, her heart heavy. Finch was about to announce to the world that a priceless piece of intelligence was a worthless forgery. He was about to close a door to the past that she, and only she, knew how to open. And a ghost's final confession would be buried forever. Clara returned to the quiet solitude of her basement workshop, the sting of Dr. Finch's condescending dismissal a familiar, bitter taste. For 30 years, she had lived with the echoes of being disbelieved, of being erased. She had made a fragile peace with her invisibility, but this was different. This wasn't about her own wounded pride. It was about a mission, a final message from a ghost, and a piece of history that was about to be buried forever by a man who trusted his machines more than his own eyes. Finch had scheduled the press conference for the following morning. The clock was ticking. She knew she couldn't let it happen. An anonymous note would be dismissed as a prank. Another verbal warning would get her fired. She needed to provide something that Finch, a man obsessed with data, could not ignore: undeniable, physical proof. She needed to show him the ghost in his machine. That night, after the last of the researchers had left and the archive had settled into its deep, humming silence, Clara began her work. Her first obstacle was access. The Donovan map, now officially labeled a forgery, had been moved to the high-security vault, a climate-controlled chamber protected by a state-of-the-art digital lock system that Dr. Finch had installed himself. Clara, as a junior staff member, had no clearance. But while Finch had built a digital fortress, he had forgotten the building's analog history. Clara had been there when the original, pre-digital security systems were decommissioned but not fully removed. She made her way to a dark, forgotten corner of the basement, a storage room filled with old card catalogs and dusty and used furniture. Behind a heavy oak filing cabinet, she found what she was looking for: a small, metal panel. Using the edge of a worn coin from her pocket, she unscrewed the plate, revealing a bundle of disconnected wires. These were the guts of the old system. She knew that for a brief period during the building's renovation, both the old and new security systems had been run in parallel. A single, forgotten line still connected this panel to the vault's manual override mechanism. With the steady, practiced hands of a woman who had once disarmed far more dangerous things than a security system, she reconnected two specific wires. She didn't have a password, but she had something better: a physical key to a door that no one else knew still existed. A soft, almost inaudible click echoed from down the hall. The digital lock on the vault was still active, but the manual deadbolt, its ghost, was now disengaged. She slipped inside, the cold, dry air of the vault a familiar welcome. She found the Donovan map carefully laid out in a preservation drawer. Now came the second part of her plan. In her restoration room, she had a piece of equipment Finch considered a relic: a variable frequency ultraviolet lamp from the 1970s. Unlike the new, standardized UV scanners the historians used, her old lamp could be manually tuned, allowing her to isolate very specific light frequencies. She knew that the ghost's signature invisible ink was designed to fluoresce only within a very narrow, specific band of the UV spectrum, a frequency modern scanners would miss entirely. She carefully wheeled the heavy, archaic lamp into the vault, its rubber wheels squeaking softly on the polished floor. She positioned it over the map and powered it on, the room filling with a low, buzzing hum. The process was delicate, a form of scientific alchemy. For nearly an hour, she painstakingly turned the dial, minutely adjusting the light's frequency, watching the map surface for any change. The work required a patience and an intuitive touch that no machine could replicate. Just as she was about to give up, she saw it. A faint, ghostly shimmer appeared on the parchment. She fine-tuned the frequency, and the shimmer grew stronger. Under the eerie purple glow of the lamp, faint, new lines began to emerge, ghosting through the top map's familiar geography. It was the second map, the real map. At that moment, she heard a soft footstep in the hallway outside the vault. Dr. Evelyn Chun, a brilliant, young Chinese-American data specialist on Finch's team, couldn't sleep. The spectrograph data for the Donovan map had been conclusive, yet something about it bothered her. There were statistical outliers, minute spectral ghosts in the ink analysis that the main program had dismissed as noise. But to her, the noise wasn't random. It had a pattern. Driven by a need to resolve the inconsistency, she had returned to the lab for the raw data, only to find the map had been moved to the vault. Heading down to the archives, she was surprised to see the heavy vault door slightly ajar. She peered inside and saw a scene that made no sense. There was Clara, the old black archivist, standing over the priceless map with a bizarre, ancient-looking lamp, bathing it in a strange, purple light. Evelyn was about to call security to report this insane breach of protocol. But then she saw the map itself. Under the ultraviolet light, she saw what her own multi-million-dollar spectrograph had missed. A second, hidden map, its faint lines weaving a secret history beneath the surface of the fake one. She saw new coastlines, different river deltas, and a small, cryptic symbol, a star inside a circle, placed in the middle of what was supposed to be an empty stretch of ocean. Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway, her scientifically ordered world completely upended. The data hadn't been wrong. It had just been incomplete, and the quiet, elderly woman who everyone dismissed had just found the truth, not with a supercomputer, but with a piece of what looked like junk from a museum. She was caught between her loyalty to the dismissive Dr. Finch and the impossible, undeniable truth glowing on the artifact before her. Clara turned, her face calm in the purple glow, her eyes meeting Evelyn's. The ghost had been found. The hum of the old ultraviolet lamp was the only sound in the vault. Dr. Evelyn Chin stood frozen in the doorway, her mind, a place of precise data and logical sequence, struggling to process the impossible scene before her. In front of her was Clara May Thompson, the woman she knew as a humble archivist, standing over the supposedly fake Donovan map. And under the lamp's eerie purple glow, a second, hidden map was blooming on the parchment like a ghostly flower. The statistical noise that had been bothering Evelyn for days wasn't noise at all. It was a message. Clara switched off the lamp, plunging the room back into the soft, normal light of the vault. The hidden map vanished. She looked at Evelyn, her expression not one of panic or guilt, but of quiet, weary resignation. "I imagine," Clara said, her voice a low, calm rumble, "that you have some questions." Evelyn found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. You knew? While we were all calling it a forgery, you knew there was something else there. How?" "Because I have seen this technique before," Clara said simply. "A long time ago, the man who made this map, the spy known as the Ghost, he was a master of hiding secrets in plain sight. He believed the best place to hide a tree was in a forest." She gestured to the map. "He created a forgery so clever, so filled with deliberate and obvious flaws, that he knew men like Dr. Finch would stop looking as soon as their machines confirmed their own biases. The forgery is not the secret, Dr. Chun. It is the lock. And this," she patted the old UV lamp, "is the key." Evelyn stepped further into the vault, her earlier fear of a security breach now completely replaced by a scientist's insatiable curiosity. But the spectrograph, it should have detected the secondary ink. "It would have, if it had been looking," Clara explained. The ghost's ink was organic, made from a rare bioluminescent fungus. It was designed to only react to a very specific, narrow frequency of light. Your modern, standardized scanners would have missed it completely. They are too strong, too broad. Sometimes, to see a whisper, you must be very, very quiet. The simple, poetic explanation was more profound than any technical manual Evelyn had ever read. She looked at Clara, at the quiet, elderly black woman who had just single-handedly dismantled a multi-million-dollar historical assessment with a museum piece and an old spy story. "You have to show this to Dr. Finch," Evelyn said, her voice now firm with conviction. Clara gave a sad, knowing smile. "Dr. Finch does not listen to people like me. He listens to machines. And his machines have already told him the matter is closed." "Then we will make him listen," Evelyn said, a new, unexpected fire in her eyes. "This isn't just about a map anymore. This is about the truth. We cannot let him bury it because of his own pride." The alliance was formed in that quiet, cold vault, a silent pact between the young, data-driven scientist and the old, intuitive spy. They spent the next hour documenting the discovery. Evelyn, using her phone, took dozens of high-resolution photos of the hidden map under the UV light, capturing every faint line, every cryptic symbol. Clara, meanwhile, pointed out the specific cartographic tells left by the ghost, the deliberate tremor in a river's line that was, in fact, a coded longitude, the slight discoloration in the compass rose that was a key to a cipher. When they were finished, Evelyn looked at Clara with a new, profound respect. "Who are you, Mrs. Thompson?" "Really?" "I am a librarian," Clara said, her expression giving nothing away. "And it is my job to make sure stories are not lost." The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:30, Dr. Finch was in his office, rehearsing his speech, a carefully worded masterpiece of academic regret and technological superiority. He was ready to announce to the world how his lab's advanced techniques had successfully unmasked a clever forgery. Then, his office door opened. Dr. Evelyn Chin stood there, her face pale but resolute. And behind her was the old archivist, Clara May Thompson. "Dr. Finch," Evelyn began, her voice steady. "We have something you need to see. It concerns the Donovan map." Finch's face tightened with annoyance. "Dr. Chun, I told Mrs. Thompson yesterday that this matter is closed. I will not have my time wasted by the senile fantasies of the basement staff. We have a press conference in 30 minutes. Then you will want to see this before you go on stage," Evelyn said. She placed her phone on his desk and played a video she had taken, a clear, detailed scan of the second, hidden map glowing under the purple light. Finch stared at the screen, his mouth falling slightly open. He saw the new coastlines, the cryptic symbols, the impossible geography that had been hiding beneath the surface of his forgery. He looked from the phone to Clara, who stood silently by the door, her hands clasped, her expression calm. "This is a trick," he stammered, his mind reeling. "A projection, a digital manipulation." "It is not," Evelyn said. "It is a second layer of ink, visible only under a specific frequency of ultraviolet light. A frequency our lab's standard equipment is not programmed to detect. The data was there all along. We just weren't looking for it correctly." Finch, a man whose entire identity was built on the infallibility of his data, felt the ground crumble beneath him. He had been so sure, so arrogant. He had dismissed the quiet old woman, and she had been right. The humiliation was a physical, nauseating wave. "Cancel the press conference," he finally choked out, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Now." He looked at Clara, his eyes a storm of confusion, shame, and a dawning, unwilling respect. "Who are you?" he asked, the same question Evelyn had asked hours before. "How could you possibly know this?" "I know this," Clara said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of a lifetime of secrets. "Because 40 years ago, it was my job to hunt the man who made that map. And I know that this is not just a map. It is his final confession. And it will lead us to something he buried, something the world has believed to be lost for a very, very long time." Of course, here is the fourth part of the story, the archivist's confession, continuing from where we left off and written to be longer and more detailed, as you requested. Dr. Alastair Finch's pristine, glass-walled office, a space he had always considered the command center of his intellectual empire, suddenly felt like a cage. The press conference had been canceled at the last possible second, replaced with a terse, vague statement about new analytical data requiring further review, a move that had sent a wave of confused speculation through the historical community. Finch now sat at his massive, empty desk, staring at the two women who had just upended his entire world, the brilliant young data specialist he had trained, and the quiet, elderly black archivist he had dismissed as a senile relic. You hunted him? Finch finally managed to say, his voice a hoarse whisper. The words felt absurd in his mouth. He was a historian who studied the past from a safe, sterile distance. This quiet old woman spoke of it as if it were a living, breathing thing, a predator she had once faced. It was a different time, Clara said, her voice betraying no emotion. A different life. The man you call the ghost was a KGB cartographer named Dmitry Volkov. He was the best there was at hiding intelligence in plain sight. Not in microdots or secret code words, but in the very fabric of his maps. He used cartography as a language. She walked over to the large monitor where an image of the hidden map was now displayed. This symbol here, she said, pointing to the star inside the circle. That was his signature for a dead drop location. And these seemingly random tremors in the riverbeds? They aren't flaws. They're a cipher, a variation of the Polybius square, keyed to a specific historical date. Finch and Evelyn watched, mesmerized, as Clara's hand, gnarled with age, traced the secret language on the screen. The woman who had been invisible to them just days ago was now revealing a hidden world of breathtaking complexity. She was a ghost herself, a living archive of a secret war. What did he hide? Finch asked, his academic curiosity finally overriding his humiliation. What is this a confession of? During the height of the Cold War, Clara explained, there was a breach. A high-level American intelligence officer was selling secrets to the Soviets. Volkov was his handler. We were closing in, but before we could make the arrest, both the American traitor and Volkov disappeared. We believed Volkov had smuggled his agent back to Moscow. We were wrong. She pointed to the map on the screen. This is not a map of a colonial settlement. This is a map of a betrayal. And if I am reading it correctly, it leads to the location where Volkov buried his last and greatest secret, the true identity of the American traitor. The silence in the office was profound. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a matter of national security, a 40-year-old wound that had never healed. We have to decode it, Evelyn said, her voice filled with a new, urgent energy. Dr. Finch, we have to put all of the archive's resources into this. Finch, a man who had been the undisputed authority in the room his entire life, was now being told what to do by his subordinate. He looked at Clara, who simply stood there, waiting. He knew he had a choice. He could try to seize control, to reassert his authority and manage this discovery as his own. Or he could do something he had never done before, admit he was out of his depth, and ask for help. His pride, the very core of his being, screamed at him to take control. But his intellect, the part of him that was a true scholar, knew he was in the presence of a mind far more experienced in this strange, shadowy world than his own. Mrs. Thompson, he said, the name feeling inadequate on his tongue. Dr. Thompson, he corrected himself. What do you need? The question was a surrender, a complete and total capitulation. It was the moment the historian finally bowed to history. Clara's expression did not change, but Evelyn saw a flicker of something in her deep, dark eyes. Not triumph, but a quiet, weary satisfaction. I need my old tools, Clara said, and I need the original map. Your digital copies are excellent, but they are ghosts. The real story is in the paper, in the ink, in the weight of the parchment in my hands. For the next 2 days, the basement of the National Archives was transformed into a secret, high-stakes intelligence hub. Under a cloak of official secrecy, Finch cleared the entire restoration wing, giving Clara and Evelyn a secure space to work. The historians and researchers who normally occupied the space were told it was a special conservation project, and they whispered with resentful curiosity about the sudden, unexplained authority of the old archivist. Clara worked with a focus and intensity that was terrifying to behold. The slightly stooped, gentle old woman disappeared, replaced by the weaver, the master analyst. She used tools that the modern historians had never seen. Calipers for measuring the precise depth of the ink's impression on the paper, a set of weighted threads for analyzing the parchment's tensile strength, a series of chemical solutions that could reveal the age of organic materials with stunning precision. She was not just reading the map, she was interrogating it. Finch watched for hours, a humbled student in his own institution. He saw Clara uncover layers of meaning that his multi-million-dollar machines had been completely blind to. She showed him how the composition of the paper in one corner was subtly different, indicating it was a replacement piece designed to carry a separate, hidden message. She showed him how the watermarks, which he had dismissed as standard for the era, were in fact a binary code. "You see," she told him, holding a piece of the parchment up to a backlit panel. "He wasn't just a spy. He was an artist. And this map is his masterpiece." Evelyn, meanwhile, worked as the bridge between Clara's analog world and their digital one. She translated Clara's physical discoveries into data points, creating a new, multi-layered digital model of the map that was infinitely more complex and truthful than their original scan. A quiet, powerful partnership was forged between the two women, the old spy who trusted her hands, and the young scientist who trusted her data, each recognizing the genius in the other. As they worked, however, a new, more immediate threat began to emerge. The sudden cancellation of the press conference had created a vacuum, and powerful people were starting to ask questions. The benefactor who had donated the map was a man with deep connections in Washington. He was furious that his discovery was being questioned. "He's calling in favors," Finch said, his face grim after a tense phone call. "He's connected to the State Department. He's demanding to know why we've locked down the map. He's accusing me of professional incompetence." Clara looked up from her work. "He is not the only one who is asking questions," she said, her voice low. She held up a piece of tracing paper on which she had been decoding the cipher from the riverbeds. The letters were starting to form a name. "Volkov's confession is not just about a traitor from 40 years ago," she said. "The American agent he was protecting. He didn't disappear. He was never caught. He went on to become a very powerful, very wealthy man. A man who has spent the last 30 years as a respected philanthropist and collector of rare maps." The blood drained from Finch's face as he understood. "Donovan," he whispered. "The man who donated the map. He's the traitor." "Yes," Clara said. "And he didn't donate this map as a gift. He sent it here to be declared a fake. He wanted the world's most famous archive to publicly discredit the one piece of evidence that could destroy him. He was trying to use your reputation to bury his own treason." The revelation that Donovan, the archive's wealthy benefactor, was the very traitor Clara had been hunting 40 years ago, settled over the room with a deathly silence. Dr. Finch, a man who dealt in the tidy narratives of the past, was now a player in a dangerous, living history. The map was not just an artifact, it was a loaded gun, and Donovan had just realized it was pointed directly at his own head. "He knows," Finch said, his voice a strained whisper. "My canceling the press conference, refusing his calls. He knows we've found something. He won't just sit back and wait for us to expose him." He was right. The first move came less than an hour later. The head of the university, a man who answered to a board of trustees chaired by none other than Donovan himself, called Finch directly. The order was simple and absolute. Dr. Finch was to cease all work on the Donovan Atlas, release a statement confirming it as a forgery as originally planned, and issue a formal apology to the benefactor for the delay and confusion. If he refused, his tenure as director would be terminated, effective immediately. Finch relayed the message to Clara and Evelyn, his face pale. He had been a man of immense institutional power, but he was now being crushed by a force far greater than his own. "He's boxing us in," he said, the fight draining from his voice. "He'll destroy my career, and he'll make sure this map is buried in the forgery vault forever." Clara looked at the two younger scientists, at their fearful, uncertain faces. She had seen this before. She had seen good people back down in the face of impossible odds. 30 years ago, she had been the one left standing alone. "He is making a mistake," Clara said, her voice a bedrock of calm in the storm. "He is acting like a powerful man, trying to silence a threat. But we are not a threat. We are librarians. We are going to declassify his entire life." Over the next 24 hours, under Clara's quiet, precise direction, the basement of the archive became the headquarters of a silent, intellectual coup. They were not spies fighting a secret war. They were archivists waging a war of information. With the torn page from my father's journal and her testimony, Abernathy filed an emergency injunction to freeze the trust, igniting a legal firestorm. Richard, now exposed, used his remaining influence to launch a brutal media campaign, painting my mother as an unstable, vindictive woman. But it was too late. Armed with the torn page and her newfound courage, my mother gave a single, powerful interview, not to a flashy news anchor, but to a respected, independent journalist known for her integrity. She didn't speak of revenge. She spoke of the quiet, insidious nature of coercive control, of the way men like Richard used money and power to build invisible prisons. Her story, backed by the undeniable proof of the ledger page, resonated with a truth that was more powerful than Richard's loud, desperate lies. The final showdown took place not in a dramatic courtroom battle, but in the quiet, sterile boardroom of a family court, at the emergency custody hearing Richard had demanded. He arrived with a team of expensive lawyers, ready to paint my mother as an unfit parent who had kidnapped her own child. He expected a terrified, broken woman. He was not prepared for the woman who walked in. My mother, flanked by Mr. Abernathy, was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, and she was not alone. In the back of the courtroom sat a dozen other women, former employees, and business associates of Richard's, each with her own story of his abuse and manipulation, all brought together by Abernathy and a network of advocates who had been inspired by my mother's story. When the judge asked Richard to present his case, Abernathy simply stood and said, "Your Honor, we would first like to present a petition to the court." He submitted a file thick with affidavits, each one a testament to Richard's long history of abuse. Richard's case collapsed before it even began. The custody hearing was dismissed, and the evidence submitted was immediately forwarded to the district attorney's office, opening a new criminal investigation into Richard Sterling. A year later, the world was a different place. Richard was awaiting trial, his empire of lies dismantled. His assets were frozen, and his reputation was in ruins. We didn't get his money. We didn't want it. We had something far more valuable, our freedom and our truth. My mother, Anna, became a fierce advocate for victims of domestic and financial abuse. She used her inheritance, what was left of my grandfather's estate after the legal battles, to start a foundation in my father's name, helping women escape the gilded cages she had known so well. And me? I found my calling in that courtroom. The fire that had been lit that day never went out. I am in my second year of law school now, driven by a passion for justice that was forged in the crucible of my family's tragedy. Sometimes, my mother and I will sit in the small, sunlit apartment that is now our home. It is a world away from the cold luxury of Richard's mansion, but it is filled with a warmth and an honesty I had never known. We will look at the old, worn note from my father, no longer a piece of evidence, but a testament to a love that transcended even death. Our story was not just about a monster being unmasked. It was about the enduring power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the quiet, unshakable strength of a mother's love. Our lives had been defined by a terrible lie, but we would spend the rest of our days building a future based on a beautiful, unbreakable truth. How many truths lie buried in silence, waiting for one brave voice to set them free? And what could we all accomplish if we chose to listen? If this story of resilience and justice moved you, please like, subscribe, and share. You never know who might need to hear that it's never too late to speak, and it's never too late to be heard.